Hello everyone, this is blog post 3. My name's Sara Isherwood. So just for clarity and academic integrity, I wanted to note that much of the content for this blog comes from the article Deep Ecology and Ecofeminism, Social Work to Address Global Environmental Crisis, which is referenced below. Also, in order to make for a more pleasant listening experience, I won't be reading out the in-text citations. So advocates of evidence-based practice claim that practice should be based on the best available evidence. I would agree, however, I think there are complexities that need to be reflected upon critically, especially regarding power dynamics, worldviews, and the dominant Western paradigm. I've decided to critically reflect on deep ecology, ecological justice and ecofeminism as frameworks and the implications for translating these into an evidence-based social work context. So social work, according to Clemmer and McNamara, has historically attempted to reprioritise society's needs and disturb power dynamics within systems. With this in mind, environmental change is emerging as one of the greatest threats to ecosystems, economies, cultures and health. The social work profession is uniquely situated to think holistically about responses to this crisis. Social workers can honour the interrelatedness of human and non-human kind and take an active role in leading new efforts in social planning and advocacy to meet this challenge. So what is ecofeminism? This approach originated from and was influenced by Foucault, Heidegger and other postmodernists, as well as Marxism, all of whom contributed to produce the tools of deconstruction which feminists have used to critically analyse dominating social discourses around modernity, privilege, power and the accepted ideas of authority and knowledge. Ecofeminism was largely a result of the deconstruction of narratives and oppression that was seen as rooted in market economies. It's also deeply influenced and guided by ecological theory, Indigenous knowledge and world views. It recognises and incorporates Indigenous worldviews that acknowledge the interrelated nature of humanity and the natural environment. Deep ecology, on the other hand, is from similar origins. It emerged as a critical response to ecological systems theory, which was seen as shallow, overly descriptive, limited, anthropocentric and unable to guide intervention on a truly holistic level. One of the key concepts of deep ecology is that Western society and systems have essentially alienated themselves from nature and the feminine, and that we must reconnect. So philosopher Nace, I think that's how you pronounce his name, said that we must amend our ways by recognising our ecological selves, which will catalyse an existential affirmation of our belonging to the natural world. Environment and ecosystem do not have the same connotations as in the natural sciences though. So to illustrate this, Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory has predominantly regarded the term ecological as relating to how well individuals and their interactions fit into their environments, not in terms of how people relate personally and practically to natural physical places and spaces. As a result, many postmodern critical feminist scholars have deemed Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory to be inadequate because it simplifies the transactions between the environment and an individual, group or organisation, excluding the deep, ancient relationship between us and the natural living ecosystems that we're part of. Recent literature also highlights the fit between Indigenous worldviews and ecofeminism, and it also speaks to the fundamental role that First Nations communities have taken as caretakers of the land and seas. So, this approach in practice, well, on a macro level, social workers must advocate for policies that situate the well-being of communities as the benchmark of socio-economic developmental processes. This includes honouring the spiritual narratives of Indigenous communities and their ways of managing sustainability, for example. On a micro and meso level, deep ecology and ecofeminism can provide, for example, psychoeducation, promote sustainable energy production and consumption, mobilise and empower communities through localised problem solving, and fight to decriminalise Indigenous and environmental protest around the world. On a macro level, these social workers also advocate for the greening of our food systems and food security, ecological justice, and they bring people together to defend international policy such as the Kyoto Protocol of 1997. In short, ecofeminist interventions develop agency, allow for critical reflection and thinking, and promote community action. Engel de Moro also has an interesting perspective and on the implications, of gender in environmental impact. So he says that environmental degradation affects women disproportionately in terms of workload and personal health. In contrast, wealthier men tend to have more decision-making power over environmental policies and over activities, which results in substantive and often negative environmental impacts. From an evidence-based perspective, deep ecology and ecofeminism are perhaps limited because they're not evidence-based at present. The movement has also expressed a disdain for reliance on existing methods of scientific inquiry and Western ways of thinking, which it claims to be the cause of the current environmental crisis. Deep ecology has been criticised for its celebration of the spiritual at the expense of the practical. On reflection, though, I suspect that this relates more to a difference in world views, as described above, which is really at the heart of the conflict between ecofeminism, deep ecology, and the dominant Western paradigm. On a grassroots level, Madeline Salustio writes about the limits of the radical ecology model, which he states, we must not aim to discourage small-scale radical ecological initiatives, but to emphasise that each social and ecological experiment we create, as essential as it is, unfolds within a constant, ever-evolving dialectic, shaped by the power dynamics of the movement and requiring continuous re-examination. Social work traditionally champions social justice as a system that ensures equitable distribution of goods and services to all. According to deep ecological thinkers, however, this idea is inherently flawed since it's rooted in market economies and the unquestioned desire for consumption and unfettered growth. Clemmer and McNamara posit that this is shallow, egocentric, individualistic, and also homocentric. They counter-argue that in striving for such a shallow form of social justice, social workers, by ignoring the exploitation and destruction of nature, may actually harm future generations. A social problem also does not arise without an equal ecological problem, since everything is interconnected. Goxel likewise claims that ecological problems cannot be sufficiently understood without a sophisticated analysis of social determinants, which constantly deconstruct and reconstruct the meaning of nature. In response to criticisms of this movement, it must be agreed at this point, however, that literature on deep ecology and ecofeminism is limited, and therefore the approach lacks an evidence base, or you could say that it just hasn't been researched enough. Its core principles do not sit well with the dominant paradigm and the high esteem in which evidence-based practice is held. However, its practices can be aligned with evidence-based research to create a more holistic and inclusive scientific inquiry, as well as to develop practice models that recognise ecological justice in particular. For example, scholar Debelina Roy suggests a feminist practice of research, which does not dismantle scientific inquiry, but provides the feminist researcher with the tools to positively disrupt the processes of scientific knowledge making. Ecofeminist and deep ecological ethics can inform social work research and interventions. Finally, as a final word, I thought I'd add this from a researcher called Priya Dasini from 2026. She puts it very well when she says, ecofeminism and environmental justice create a foundation for addressing both environmental degradation and social inequality. Ecofeminism enhances the environmental justice movements by linking women's oppression and environmental exploitation. The promotion of ecofeminist ideals can be achieved through environmental justice, as this will provide a practical outlook for a systematic. I'll read that again. The promotion of ecofeminist ideals can be achieved through environmental justice, as this will provide a practical outlook and practice for systemic change that will benefit both people and planet. Together, this will lay the foundation for a future that can be fair, sustainable, and just. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I'm recording this from my home in far north Queensland, where I'm staying for the Easter holidays.